Section 34 of The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Buchanan. The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 1, by Cao Xueqin. Translated by Henry Bincraft Joly. Chapter 16, Part 1. Jia Yuanchun is, on account of her talents, selected to enter the Fang Sao Palace. Qin Qing departs in the prime of life by the Yellow Spring Road. But we must now return to the two lads, Qin Chong and Pao-yü. After they had passed, along with lady Feng, from the temple of the Iron Fence, whither she had gone to see how things were getting on, they entered the city in their carriages. On their arrival at home, they paid their obeisance to dowager lady Chia, madame Wang, and the other members of the family, whence they returned to their own quarters, where nothing worth mentioning transpired during the night. On the next day, Pao-yü, perceiving that the repairs to the outer schoolroom had been completed, settled with Qin Chong that they should have evening classes. But as it happened that Qin Chong, who was naturally of an extremely delicate physique, caught somewhat of a chill in the country, and clandestinely indulged besides in an intimacy with Chih Neng, which unavoidably made him fail to take good care of himself, he was, shortly after his return, troubled with a cough and a feverish cold, with nausea for drink and food, and fell into such an extremely poor state of health that he simply kept indoors and nursed himself, and was not in a fit condition to go to school. Pao-yü's spirits were readily damped, but as there was likewise no remedy, he had no other course than to wait until his complete recovery, before he could make any arrangements. Lady Feng had meanwhile received a reply from Yuan Kuang, in which he informed her that everything had been satisfactorily settled, and the old nun apprised the Chang family that the major had actually suppressed his indignation, hushed his complaints, and taken back the presents of the previous engagement. But who would have ever anticipated that a father and mother, whose hearts were set upon position and their ambition upon wealth, could have brought up a daughter so conscious of propriety and so full of feeling as to seize the first opportunity, after she had heard that she had been withdrawn from her former intended, and been promised to the Li family, to stealthily devise a way to commit suicide by means of a handkerchief? The son of the major, upon learning that Chin Ko had strangled herself, there and then jumped into the river and drowned himself, as he too was a being full of love. The Chang and Li families were, sad to relate, very much cut up, and in very truth, 2 lives and money had been sacrificed all to no use. Lady Feng, however, during this while, quietly enjoyed the 3,000 taels, and madame Wang did not have even so much as the faintest idea of the whole matter. But ever since this occasion, lady Feng's audacity acquired more and more strength, and the actions of this kind which she in after days performed, defy enumeration. One day, the very day on which Chia Cheng's birthday fell, while the members of the 2 households of Ning and Jung were assembled together offering their congratulations, and unusual bustle and stir prevailed, a gatekeeper came in at quite an unexpected moment to announce that Mr. Hsia, metropolitan head eunuch of the 6 palaces, had come with the special purpose of presenting an edict from His Majesty, a bit of news which plunged Chia She, Chia Cheng and the whole company into great consternation, as they could not make out what was up. Speedily interrupting the theatrical performance, they had the banquet cleared and the altar laid out with incense, and, opening the centre gate, they fell on their knees to receive the edict. Soon they caught sight of the head eunuch, Hsia Ping-chung, advancing on horseback, and besides himself a considerable retinue of eunuchs. The eunuch Hsia did not, in fact, carry any mandate or present any decree, but straightway advancing as far as the main hall, he dismounted, and, with a face beaming with smiles, he walked into the hall and took his stand on the southern side. "I have had the honour," he said, of receiving a special order to at once summon Chia Cheng to present himself at court, and be admitted in His Majesty's presence in the Ling Ching Hall." When he had delivered this message, he did not so much as take any tea, but forthwith mounted his horse and took his leave. Chia Cheng and the others could not even conceive what omen this summons implied, but he had no alternative but to change his clothes with all haste and to present himself at court, while dowager lady Chia and the inmates of the whole household were, in their hearts, a prey to such perplexity and uncertainty that they incessantly despatched messengers on flying steeds to go and bring the news. After the expiry of 4 hours, they suddenly perceived Lai Ta and 3 or 4 other butlers run in, quite out of breath, through the ceremonial gate and report the glad tidings. "We have received," they added, "our master's commands to hurriedly request her venerable ladyship to take madame Wang and the other ladies into the palace to return thanks for His Majesty's bounty," and other words to the same purport. Dowager lady Chia was, at this time, standing with agitated heart under the veranda of the large hall waiting for tidings, whilst the 2 ladies, Mesdames Hsing and Wang, Mrs. Yu, Li Wan, lady Feng, Ying Ch'un and her sisters, even up to Mrs. Hsüeh and the rest, were congregated in one place, ascertaining what was the news. Old lady Chia likewise called Lai Ta in, and minutely questioned him as to what had happened. "Your servants," replied Lai Ta, "simply stood waiting outside the Lin Chuang gate, so that we were in total ignorance of what was going on inside, when presently the eunuch Hsia came out and imparted to us the glad tidings, telling us that the eldest of the young ladies in our household had been raised by His Majesty to be an overseer in the Feng Xiao Palace, and that he had, in addition, conferred upon her the rank of worthy and virtuous secondary consort." By and by, Mr. Chia Cheng came out and also told us the same thing. "Master is now gone back again to the Eastern Palace, whither he requests your venerable ladyship to go at once and offer thanks for the imperial favour." When old lady Chia and the other members of the family heard these tidings, they were at length reassured in their minds, and so elated were they all in one moment that joy was visible in their very faces. Without loss of time, they commenced to don the gala dresses suitable to their rank, which done, old lady Chia led the way for the 2 ladies, Mesdames Hsing and Wang, as well as for Mrs. Yu, and their official chairs, 4 of them in all, entered the palace like a trail of fish, while Chia She and Chia Chen, who had likewise changed their clothes for their court dress, took Chia Se and Chia Jung along and proceeded in attendance upon dowager lady Chia. Indeed, of the 2 households of Ning and Jung, there was not one, whether high or low, woman or man, who was not in a high state of exultation, with the exception of Pao-yü, who behaved just as if the news had not reached his ears, and can you, reader, guess why? The fact is that Chih Neng of the Water Moon Convent had recently entered the city in a surreptitious manner, in search of Ch'in Chung, but, contrary to expectation, her visit came to be known by Ch'in Yeh, who drove Ch'in Neng away and laid hold of Ch'in Chung and gave him a flogging. But this outburst of temper of his brought about a relapse of his old complaint, with the result that, in 3 or 5 days, he, sad to say, succumbed. Ch'in Chung had, himself, been in a delicate state of health, and had besides receiving a caning before he had got over his sickness, so that when he now saw his aged father pass away from the consequences of a fit of anger, he felt at this stage so full of penitence and distress that the symptoms of his illness were again considerably aggravated. Hence it was that Pao-yü was downcast and unhappy at heart, and that nothing could, in spite of the promotion of Yuan Ch'un by imperial favour, dispel the depression of his spirits. Dowager lady Chia and the rest, in due course, offered thanks and returned home. The relatives and friends came to present their congratulations. Great stir and excitement prevailed during these few days in the mansions of Ning and Jung, and every one was in high glee. But he alone looked upon everything as if it were nothing, taking not the least interest in anything, and as this reason led the whole family to sneer at him, the result was that he got more and more doltish. Luckily, however, Chia Lien and Tai-yü were on their way back, and had dispatched messengers in advance to announce the news that they would be able to reach home the following day, so that when Pao-yü heard the tidings, he was at length somewhat cheered; and when he came to institute minute inquiries, he eventually found out that Chia Yü-ts'un was also coming to the capital to have an audience with his Majesty; that it was entirely because Wang Tzu-tsang had repeatedly laid before the throne memorials recommending him, that he was coming on this occasion to wait in the metropolis for a vacancy which he could fill up; that, as he was a kinsman of Chia Lien's, acknowledging the same ancestors as he did, and he stood, on the other hand, with Tai-yü in the relationship of tutor and pupil, he was, in consequence, following the same road, and coming as their companion; that Lin Ruhai had already been buried in the ancestral vault, and that every requirement had been attended to with propriety; that Chia Lien, on this voyage to the capital, would, had he progressed by the ordinary stages, have been over a month before he could reach home, but that when he came to hear the good news about Yuan Ch'un, he pressed on day and night to enter the capital, and that the whole journey had been throughout, in every respect, both pleasant and propitious. But Pao-yü merely ascertained whether Tai-yü was all right, and did not even so much as trouble his mind with the rest of what he heard; and he remained on the tiptoe of expectation till noon of the morrow, when, in point of fact, it was announced that Mr. Lien, together with Miss Lin, had made their entrance into the mansion. When they came face to face, grief and joy vied with each other, and they could not help having a good cry for a while; after which followed again expressions of sympathy and congratulations; while Pao-yü pondered within himself that Tai-yü had become still more surpassingly handsome. Tai-yü had also brought along with her a good number of books, and she promptly gave orders that the sleeping room should be swept, and that the various knick-knacks should be put in their proper places. She further produced a certain quantity of paper, pencils, and other such things, and distributed them among Pao-ch'ai, Ying-ch'un, Pao-yü and the rest; and Pao-yü also brought out, with extreme care, the string of Ling-ling scented beads, which had been given to him by the Prince of Peking, and handed them, in his turn, to Tai-yü as a present. "What foul man has taken hold of them?" exclaimed Tai-yü. "I don't want any such things." And as she forthwith dashed them down and would not accept them, Pao-yü was under the necessity of taking them back. But for the time being we will not allude to them, but devote our attention to Chia Lien. Having, after his arrival home, paid his salutations to all the inmates, he retired to his own quarters at the very moment that lady Feng had multifarious duties to attend to, and had not even a minute to spare; but, considering that Chia Lien had returned from a distant journey, she could not do otherwise than put by what she had to do, and to greet him and wait on him. "Imperial uncle," she said, in a jocose manner, when she realised that there was no outsider present in the room, "I congratulate you. What fatigue and hardship you, imperial uncle, have had to bear throughout the whole journey! Your humble servant heard yesterday, when the courier sent ahead came and announced that your highness would this day reach the mansion. I have merely got ready a glass of mean wine for you to wipe down the dust with, but I wonder whether your highness will deign to bestow upon it the lustre of your countenance and accept it." Chia Lien smiled. "How dare I presume to such an honour?" he added by way of rejoinder. "I'm unworthy of such attention. Many thanks, many thanks." P'ing Erh and the whole company of waiting maids simultaneously paid their obeisance to him, and this ceremony concluded, they presented tea. Chia Lien thereupon made inquiries about the various matters which had transpired in their home after his departure, and went on to thank lady Feng for all the trouble she had taken in the management of them. "How could I control all these manifold matters?" remarked lady Feng. "My experience is so shallow, my speech so dull, and my mind so simple, that if any one showed me a club, I would mistake it for a pen. Besides, I'm so tender-hearted that, were any one to utter a couple of glib remarks, I couldn't help feeling my heart give way to compassion and sympathy. I've had, in addition, no experience in any weighty questions. My pluck is likewise so very small that when Madame Wang has felt in the least displeased, I have not been able to close my eyes in sleep. Urgently did I more than once resign the charge, but her ladyship wouldn't again agree to it, maintaining on the contrary that my object was to be at ease, and that I was not willing to reap experience. Leaving aside that she doesn't know that I take things so much to heart, that I can scoop the perspiration in handfuls, that I daren't utter one word more than is proper, nor venture to recklessly take one step more than I ought to, you know very well which of the women servants, in charge of the menage in our household, is easy to manage. If ever I make the slightest mistake, they laugh at me and poke fun at me, and if I incline a little one way, they show their displeasure by innuendos. They sit by and look on, they use every means to do harm, they stir up trouble, they stand by on safe ground and look on and don't give a helping hand to lift any one they have thrown over, and they are one and all of them old hands in such tricks. I'm moreover young in years, and not able to keep people in check, so that they naturally don't show any regard for me. What is still more ridiculous is that, after the death of Jung Er's wife in that mansion, brother Chen time and again begged Madame Wang on his very knees to do him the favour to ask me to lend him a hand for several days. I repeatedly signified my refusal, but her ladyship gave her consent in order to oblige him, so that I had no help but to carry out her wish, putting, as is my wont, everything topsy-turvy, and making matters worse than they were, with the result that brother Chen up to this day bears me a grudge and regrets having asked for my assistance. When you see him to-morrow, do what you can to excuse me by him. Young as she is, tell him, and without experience of the world, who ever could have instigated Mr. Chia Cheng to make such a mistake as to choose her?" While they were still chatting, they heard people talking in the outer apartments, and lady Feng speedily inquired who it was. P'ing Erh entered the room to reply. "Lady Hsüeh," she said, "has sent sister Hsiang Ling over to ask me something, but I've already given her my answer and sent her back." "Quite so," interposed Chia Lien with a smile. "A short while ago I went to look up Mrs. Hsüeh, and came face to face with a young girl, whose features were supremely perfect; and as I suspected that, in our household, there was no such person, I asked in the course of conversation Mrs. Hsüeh about her, and found out eventually that this was the young waiting maid they had purchased on their way to the capital, Hsiang Ling by name, and that she had, after all, become an inmate of the household of that big fool Hsüeh. Since she's had her hair dressed as a married woman, she does look so much more preeminently beautiful. But that big fool Hsüeh has really brought contamination upon her." "Ai!" exclaimed lady Feng, "here you are back from a trip to Sudo and Hangdo, where you should have seen something of the world, and have you still an eye as envious and a heart so covetous? Well, if you wish to bestow your love on her, there's no difficulty worth speaking of. I'll take P'ing Erh over and exchange her for her. What do you say to that? That old brother Hsüeh is also one of those men who, while eating what there is in the bowl, keeps an eye on what there is in the pan. For the last year or so, as he couldn't get Hsiang Ling to be his, he made ever so many distressing appeals to Mrs. Hsüeh, and Mrs. Hsüeh, while esteeming Hsiang Ling's looks, though fine, as after all a small matter, thought her deportment and conduct so far unlike those of the other girls, so gentle and so demure, that almost the very daughters of masters and mistresses couldn't attain her standard, that she therefore went to the trouble of spreading a banquet, and of inviting guests, and in open court, and in the legitimate course, she gave her to him for a secondary wife. But half a month had scarcely elapsed before he looked upon her also as a good-for-nothing person, as he did upon a large number of them. I can't, however, help feeling pity for her in my heart." Section 35.